All right, we're going to start talking about Hebrews tonight. I'm sure there's a joke there somewhere about who's supposed to mix the coffee or something. I'm not. But a great book. We did a series of studies on Paul and his writings and his history. And so I decided there was a good connection here because probably many of you feel strongly that Paul wrote Hebrews. We'll talk about that a little bit. Some of you probably think, who cares who wrote Hebrews? It's in the Bible, so that's what's important. But I thought it is a logical thing to follow up talking about it and going from there. In fact, I talked to Phil about this several months ago, and that was probably 6 weeks ago, about who he thought wrote Hebrews, and he believes Paul did, and he's got a lot of information. I don't know if you want to share that or not, Phil. I didn't ask you to ahead of time, so you prepare, but you were on point that night, so.
I guess it was 10, 11 years ago. I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the University of Michigan Library. On the 8th floor, they have a special floor dedicated to the ancient papyri, that is the type of stuff that they wrote on. And the earliest copies of the New Testament that we have are on papyri. I was able to witness or to look at and to hold in my hand, believe it or not, one sheet of a papyri that had the earliest writings of Matthew, and it was the section dealing with the Lord's Supper. But I also was able to hold a section of P46, which is the earliest existing copy of the writing of the Apostle Paul. And I held one leaf in my hand. It was the end of the book of Romans. On one side, it had the last part of it, but on the other side, there was one line, which is the last line of Romans, and then there was the headline of the next book. Well, most people would think that would be 1 Corinthians, but it was not. It was Hebrews, which says that in the latter part of the 2nd century, up to 200, that there were many, many people who regarded the book of Hebrews as something that Paul had written. It does not prove that Paul wrote it, but it is a very strong argument.
See, I couldn't have told that at all. Which is interesting. I mean, it does lend itself to that, and a lot of you have King James. It says in there that Paul wrote it, so you're good with that. But anyway, I just want to put that out there. So if Paul wrote, and that there are people who feel strongly that he did, the dating of it helps a little bit because it's going to get us probably a little bit more to the mid-60s probably of the writing of Hebrews. So that would help a lot in that sense. So with that in mind, thinking about the book of Hebrews, why it was written, and the nature of it, and if Paul wrote it, to me, it has a little bit different flavor. Paul being the apostle to the Gentiles, being kind of that concept, and this being written very much to Hebrews. So maybe at the end of Paul's life, when he wrote some of those letters to Timothy and Titus, and he thought about what he was wrapping up with getting leaders in place for the coming generations, maybe he wrote a book that was really, because he was the Hebrew of Hebrews, which would really fit in with who he was at his core. So that's just a thought. And let me, with that thought, how he warned those, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, about following the teachings closely, not to let people get off track. We have Hebrews that we think was probably written from Italy and all that. And it's really, like Randy said here a while back when he preached in Hebrews, it's really more of a sermon, which is quite interesting how it's kind of designed and laid out and all of that. But it was written to a group of Hebrews that were Hebrew Christians, Jewish Christians, who seemed to just kind of, they were running out of steam. They were kind of getting discouraged. Things were a little bit different. And so much so that they were going to go back. It seems like they had a desire to go back to, let's just do a whole lot more of the Old Testament. And you guys, this group identifies with that, don't they? Don't you feel like the church is just, you want to go back to the old stuff? Because you were comfortable. All right, some no's back there, that's good. Sometimes we get, as we get a little older and we do something for a while, we think, let's go back to the old stuff. And I think they were tempted very much to do that. They were kind of just going to give up on Christianity. And so we have this wonderful letter that lays out from a Jewish perspective why not to do that. That God had a design for Jesus, he had a design for the new covenant, and that we should move forward that way. So there is that perspective. It is placed like you were mentioning, following Romans, I guess, in that context. For us, it follows Paul's letters and transitions to the general epistles. Some would call them Catholic epistles, meaning universal church, that were just written to a region or a group of people, not to a specific congregation or to a specific individual. So Hebrews is a little bit differently that way. And it talks a lot about, uses the word better and superior and that kind of concept in contrast to the new covenant, in contrast to the old covenant. So, a very intriguing book, a really good book. Fred was just mentioning, he asked me if I had a commentary by Milligan on Hebrews, and I'm pretty sure that's what we used when we were at Harding. And he was saying that there's two books that churches of Christ are really good on, and I said Hebrews. Because when you think about it, Hebrews is all about that you can fall from grace and very much New Testament, understanding the New Testament, the New Covenant, and all that. And I said, what's the other one? He said, well, Acts. And I thought, yeah, obviously. I didn't think about that. But Hebrews really is kind of like you mentioned, it should be one of our books, so to speak, because we just understand the covenants better than a lot of the denominational world does. A lot of times, that's one of the early things you have to study with people when you study the Bible, because they will, go chasing rabbits in the Old Testament about this law and that law and how they use instrumental music and all kinds of things. And I always want to say, yeah, but are you offering sacrifices like they did in the Old Covenant? No, that's old. That's all past. So it's an interesting study, and I think a helpful, logical, sequential thing to look at. Questions or comments from you guys, or things that you would add on Hebrews right offhand? Yes, Jerry?
Back many, seems like a century ago now, when I was in college, at Central Christian, that's how old I am. I took one class called Romans, Galatians, and Hebrews. And when I enrolled in, I thought, boy, this is going to be something. We're going to talk about three entirely different things. Turns out, no, we're not. Those three books deal basically with the same problem of Jewish Christians wanting to go back to Judaism. Mm-hmm. And they're addressed in different ways. And after I got through that class, I thought, it's interesting how the different books in the New Testament tie together.
Yes.
And this seems to tie all the other books, all the other letters that Paul wrote. Even if he didn't write this one, it ties all of them together. Mm-hmm. Shows the superiority of Christ in everything.
Right, and how we need to be looking forward, moving forward. I mean, we can look back and learn a lot from the Old Testament, the sacrifices, the priesthood, Melchizedek, all of that. But keep moving forward and focusing on Jesus.
All that led to Christ.
Right.
And that's the point.
Yeah, it should lead us to Jesus as well. Let me just mention this. Kind of the theme is Jesus, the ultimate revelation of God and the fulfillment of the Old Testament law, tied into what you're saying. And the first 4 verses, when we look at those tonight, that's very much that Jesus is the exact representation. It's written to a group of predominantly Jewish Christian believers, probably in Italy from 60 to 90. If Paul wrote it, not likely to be 90, okay? But I do mention that there's a variety of, wow, there's a whole lot of speculation. There's all kinds of people who want to come up with their theories of who wrote Hebrews, and I think, man, they're just grasping for straws. And but there are some legitimate arguments on some of those too. But so a wide range, not always. So you think about Rome, and again, we don't know where the Hebrew people were, but there's that. So here's timeline, and so 60 to 90, somewhere in through there. And if Paul wrote it, obviously, probably more likely at the end of his life. So there's a really broad outline: preeminence of Christ, the great high priest, and then the exhortation to faithfulness, which is much like a sermon, a lot of application points at the end there. Yes, Fred?
On that dating, it's almost certainly it was before the destruction of the temple. Because he says these things are still going on, they're obsolete, they're passing away, but it was still happening when this book was written. So
Yeah. To me, that's interesting to think about before the destruction of the temple, because to me, God is really speaking loudly that the temple's going to be destroyed. The end of the Jewish rituals, religion, those practices are all coming to an end, and this reinforces all of that. This would be a written document that would help them think through that. So very good point that out. Anything else you guys would add like that? Yes, Dale.
The writer was highly educated in the Old Testament prophecies concerning Jesus and how to use those in a very logical way to prove that Jesus is superior.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul did that on Mars Hill.
Yes, he did. Yeah. Yeah. In a lot of ways, there's a lot of reasons to believe Paul did write it, because it's a different style of writing, so to speak, but it's very logical, somebody who understood Judaism a lot. Now, Phil made the point that night that it's written very much like a lot of other Paul's writing. So bear that in mind as well. Well, what are some of your favorite verses or sections out of Hebrews? 11th chapter, the Hall of Faith. Yeah, by faith. There's one of the things you look for when you study letters like this in the Bible is you look for repeated phrases. And that's always kind of a clue of kind of the focus. And by faith is right up there in some of the highest phrases. It may be like second or third, but it's right up there. So by faith, which again is emphasizing New Testament relationship with God through Christ. Yes, Fred.
another one that's very important for this book is once for all.
Once for all, yeah.
Going back to the old continual worship, and it also precludes later prophets, whether it's Muhammad or Joseph Smith.
Mhm. Very good, yeah. Larry.
I think verses 1 through 4, chapter 1, are extremely powerful.
Yes, they are. Very good. You want to add something to that?
Well, I think it lays out who Jesus is,
Uh-huh.
what he's accomplished, what he and God together have done.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. Jerry, then we'll go back over here to Terry.
I look at action words too, just cruising through here, it says, hold fast, don't forsake, do not cast away. What's the other one on here? Pursue peace, endure chastening. It's not a passive religion.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Especially a lot of those kind of verbs, that last section, that's kind of to me, kind of the sermon application section. Terry, right here.
They remind me of the amount of transfiguration. Jesus is superior to Moses and Elijah. Hear ye him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, listen to who Jesus is and what he says.
How about exact representation? Verse 3.
The
Yeah.
Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. Exact representation, that's powerful, I think.
Yeah. And much like where in John 14, where Jesus said to the apostles, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Roger, I feel like I missed another hand, but
I hear a lot that people say this departed person is now an angel worshiping God in heaven. And this little section, I don't know if you want to get there yet or not, but coming up, the writer is saying, to which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son and I'm your father, and so on. Then he quotes a lot of Psalms and some things, I think from 1st or 2nd Samuel. But down at the bottom, he finally says in verse 14, are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation?
yeah.
So the angels are to serve us, and we are the sons of God through the inheritance. And so every time I hear that preached at a funeral service, I kind of think about that. No, he's not an angel. He's being served by the angels.
Mm-hmm. Very good. That's not always real great theology at funerals. Dale?
Also, there's so many warnings about drifting away,
Yes.
and especially in chapter 2, which we'll get to, about drifting away and the warnings about it, and then goes into how. And it's not something that you fall away. When you drift, it's little by little.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what the Galatians would do.
Mm-hmm. Spoken like a true shepherd, he's observant in people drifting. And it is an observation, I think sometimes people don't just, sometimes people do just out and out, they're mad at the church and they quit. But the devil works however he can. He'll drive you away all at once, or he will just let you kind of drift. And as long as you are content to drift and get further and further away from Christians, the Bible, and then eventually God, you don't realize where you are. And drifting is an interesting word, because we've all probably been in a boat and drifted in the darkness of night and found ourselves somewhere totally different. Or I was in an airplane with a guy one time who was trying to fly all visual, and we got into clouds, and we had drifted probably 40 miles whenever we finally got out of the clouds. And it was a scary time, but once we got to visual where we could see, we knew a lot more where we were. But drifting is a way that, kind of like the frog that gets boiled, it just happens a little bit at a time. And we see relatives that drift. I've seen eldership adrift, not here, but I've seen, and preachers drift. I've seen people who are really, you thought, oh, they'll always stick to the Bible and to stick to God, but they drift. And we have to be careful that we don't drift like that. So, good word. All right, let's read the 4 verses. Frank is going to read that for us. And Doug, if you don't mind, think ahead to the rest of chapter. You shake your head no, okay.
Not tonight, thank you.
All right, sounds good. We'll get somebody to read the other part later on. Okay, Roger, later on. Frank?
All right. God's supreme revelation. In verse 1. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in times past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high, having become so much better than the angels, as he has by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they.
All right. So very good. He's establishing this relationship where he's coming from in these very first verses, and like Larry said, these are really key verses. So he's looking back. When he looks back in the past, he said, yeah, God spoke a lot. And it was very diverse, many prophets over a long period of time, and in a lot of ways. I mean, spoke to a donkey, he trying to think, a lot of things. Sun standing still, through stone tablets, directly to the patriarch. He spoke through Moses. He spoke through some of the kings. He spoke through prophets that are later on. And he spoke in a lot of ways to a lot of people over a long period of time. But now, in these last days, in contrast to all of that, it is different. And a little bit along with what Fred said, once and for all, or for all times, talking about the sacrifices and those kind of things, the speaking as well. But in these days, he's spoken to us by his Son. We have those Gospels. We have other letters as well. But the law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus. So he's spoken to us through his Son. Like somebody said, not modern day prophets or latter day prophets, but he's spoken to us through his Son. And he appointed heir of all things through his Son. And the universe was made. And the Son had that radiance of God's glory and the exact representation. I want to say that the word there, if memory serves me right, is almost like icon. It's almost like icon cameras, and I think how you take a picture, and a picture is an exact representation, if it's a good camera, and you don't have your finger over the lens, all those kind of things. But a picture tells you a lot, and Jesus, looking at Jesus, tells us a lot about God, and understanding who God is, how he thinks, how he processes things, and all of that. And then sustaining all things by his powerful word. His powerful word is what we're going to be judged by at the last days. And then, after he had provided purification for sins, obviously, an implication, Old Testament stuff, like the high priest would go in and offer that. Well, Jesus, after he had provided purifications for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God in heaven. And that was a sacrifice once and for all times. It happened once, and it only took that one time for everything moving forward. And some would even say moving backwards as well. So he became superior. He is superior. He is not just a option, he is the option. He's the way, the truth, the life. And nobody comes to the Father except for through him. So he is much superior to the angels. He's superior to everything. And that's really kind of what Hebrews is going to talk about, is how much superior he is to all those things. He's superior to all those books somebody might try to get you to read, and he is just superior. So questions or comments and thoughts on that? Jerry?
I think the point he's making to the Jews, that under the old law, it was just God. And he's saying now, because of what Jesus has done, this is proof that he's equal to God, and that he was God in the beginning. He was there during the creation, and he paid that ultimate price so that we could get back in that right relationship with God. And it was proved by God sending him back to heaven.
Yeah.
Setting that quote, I don't know what the right hand of God really is, but it's a figure of speech saying, this is a position of authority.
Yeah. Obviously that God is right-handed. No, I'm just kidding. That's a pure joke. My wife is left-handed. My older son's left-handed. Half my grandkids are left-handed, so.
They're in their right mind.
They're in their right mind. There you go. Yeah, a prestigious position. So, an important position. All right, anything else you guys want to add on that one?
I'd like to add something, Mike, that I think goes right along with this. Those 4 verses, they kind of lay the foundation and kind of get you going, and I'm way over in verse 10. And you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain, and they will grow old and old like a garment, but you will remain. That's what God did.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's underlying things I need to highlight, so I need to underline that one. So. All right, Roger, would you read verse 5 through 14?
For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have become your father"? Or again, "I will be his father and he will be my son"? And again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." And speaking of the angels, he says, "He makes his angels spirits and his servants flames of fire." But about the Son, he says, "Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy." He also says, "In the beginning, Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. You will roll them up like a robe. Like a garment they will be changed. But you remain the same, and your years will never end." To which of the angels did God ever say, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet"? Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation?
All right, thank you. We probably are going to get into something that somebody wants to ask about, and we'll have to come back next week and talk about that, which may be possible. I don't have a deadline to get through Hebrews. But anyway, obviously, this section, he is comparing Jesus being superior to angels. Aren't we fascinated by angels? Well, some of us are not. Some people will read book and book after book after book on angels, and I don't want to be critical of that, but don't do that to the neglect of reading about Jesus, because Jesus is far superior. He's far more important. You can have questions about angels and not understand it, but if you have questions about Jesus, you need to try to understand it. And that's probably a key thing. And he does make some of those comparisons, like he never said to an angel, "You are my son," like he did Jesus. But Jesus is far superior to angels, and angels worship him. He doesn't worship the angels. So, kind of some key things there. God, that word remain, and it comes up again in verse 12, remain the same. God is, as the Hebrew writer would say, he is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. So there's a consistency with God. God does not change like shifting shadows. He is a key thing. Questions? So no questions or comments about that? Okay, good, Jerry.
It always amazed me that when you look in the incidents of the angels appearing in the Old Testament and even in the New, people were afraid. Some even terrified. Look at some of the TV programs and the movies where angels appear. Oh, you're an angel.
Yeah.
It's nonchalant. Totally opposite of what really happens. I'd be probably, okay, I'm not wearing boots.
Yeah.
I'd be shaking in my boots if I had boots on,
Yeah.
if one would appear suddenly here. Probably most of us would pass out.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't say, "Oh, you're an angel." So I think the idea that the Jews had of angels would go back to the Old Testament times, that we're going to worship something angelic we know it's from God, and we're very apprehensive and scared of doing anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
Want me to get started on this or not, but I do believe in angels. I don't compare them to God, Jesus, or the Holy Spirit, but several years back, I was on a trip coming home from Hawaii, and I got sick. I had a UTI really bad, and I don't know actually how I got from one place to another at times. It was during a blizzard in Phoenix. So from Los Angeles, I got to Phoenix. We didn't get, no, we left Phoenix and we were going to New Mexico, and they had to turn around and come back. There were people in that airport that got me from one place to another. They got my luggage. I didn't even know where my luggage was. They got me to a bus station. I believe those weren't God's angels, because I don't know how that happened. I was so sick. And it was kind of awesome, but I wasn't scared. I was just thankful somebody got me where I needed to be.
So you entertain angels unaware, or?
But it was so obvious that someone was seeing after me.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe God sent them here. Never saw them again, never knew them. They looked like regular people, but I think they were all angels. Because it wasn't just one. They handed me off.
Very good. Somebody had a hand. Oh, Donna.
I was just gonna say, we entertain angels unawares, so we might actually have had angels sitting at our table. We wouldn't know that they're angels, they just look like people.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
I got one.
All right, we'll get you and then come back to Dale.
My studies say that all angels are males. They don't have feathers or tails. So next time you call your wife an angel, how do you go about that?
Yeah.
She never called me angel.
My grandkids are next to angels or something. Yes, Dale.
This in Hebrews is just a reinforcement of what the psalmist said in Psalm 91. That for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. And so there was a promise there and there's a continuing promise because God does not change.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. All right, we went a few minutes. Fred?
I'm gonna get back to Jesus. That's the whole point of this. And verse 10 reinforces back what we learned in John chapter 1, verse 3. Jesus was creator, not just a created being, but part of creation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need to keep, as Terry said, this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. We need to listen to Jesus, and appreciate what Jesus teaches us and helps us through, so.